Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode 7 of Talk About It. I'm sorry, The Black or the Berry. This is what happens when you have multiple podcasts. So let's just jump right into this episode. Ladies, I know you felt left out, but imagine walking into a room filled with powerful men who have already decided that you're beneath them. They refuse to accept you or refuse to accept you or to offer you a chair. Instead of accepting the insult, you create your own throne. That was Queen Nzinga. And for nearly 40 years, 4 decades, she challenged one of the most powerful empires on earth. Welcome back to The Black of the Berry, where Black history isn't a side note to history. It is history. Again, this is Queen Nzinga, the woman who refused to bow. Again, welcome to The Black of the Berry, where Black history is American history, world history, and the story of a people whose contributions have shaped civilization. I'm your host, Marvin Lee, and today we're talking about one of the most remarkable leaders the world has ever known, a queen who stared down an empire and refused to surrender. A powerful woman enters a room to negotiate with Portuguese officials. This is the year 1622, and I want you to imagine this. She represents her people. The Portuguese governor sits comfortably in a chair. There's no chair for her. The message is clear. You're beneath us. That message didn't just start today. It started long ago. But Queen Nzinga had no intention of accepting disrespect. According to tradition, she signaled one of her attendants. The attendant knelt beside her. Visualize this. Her attendant knelt beside her. Nzinga sat upon her attendant's back and conducted negotiations, eye to eye, with the governor. She would not sit below him. She would not bow. She would not accept inferiority. Today, we're telling the story of a queen who spent decades fighting European colonization, protecting her people from enslavement, and proving that leadership has nothing to do with gender and everything to do with courage. Yes, her name was Queen Nzinga. Now, one of the biggest myths that's taught in Western education is that Africa was waiting to be discovered. Nothing could be further from the truth. Long before European colonization, Africa was home to kingdoms, empires, universities, trade routes, architects, scholars, and military leaders. Yes, men and women, my African American brothers and sisters, my Black brothers and sisters, you have descended from this lineage. Nzinga was born around 1583 in the kingdom of Ndongo, which is located in now what is called the country of Angola. Ndongo was politically organized and economically active. But there was a growing threat: the Portuguese. Portugal wasn't interested in friendship. Portugal wanted wealth. Like most modern countries that we know now, they're pillaging Africa for the wealth, or alkebulan, for its wealth. This is nothing new. There's nothing new under the sun. That which is has already been. Read your Bibles. Portugal not only wanted wealth, Portugal wanted territory. And most importantly, Portugal wanted people. The transatlantic slave trade was expanding rapidly. Millions of Africans would eventually be captured and transported across the Atlantic. Nzinga grew up watching these pressures intensify. Imagine that. Watching these pressures intensify, and the thoughts that she had, and the things that she wanted to do as a result of that. Imagine that. Now, so again, Nzinga was not born into an easy world. Her father was a king. From an early age, she learned diplomacy, governance, and warfare. Unlike many societies at the time, leadership skills mattered more than gender. She listened carefully. She studied politics. She learned languages. She observed military strategies. Her intelligence became impossible to ignore. When conflicts with Portugal escalated, her brother, the king, recognized her talents. Her brother, the king, recognized her talents. He selected Nzinga as an ambassador. This decision would change history. Imagine the pressure. An African woman negotiating with representatives of one of Europe's major powers. Many expected her to fail. Instead, she stunned everyone. Now, let's return to their room. The Portuguese thought that the symbolism mattered, and they were right. Power is often communicated through symbols: a throne, a crown, a flag, a chair. By denying Nzinga a seat, or excuse me, by denying Queen Nzinga a seat, they attempted to establish dominance before negotiations even began, which is, we see modern day leaders taking a page out of the Portuguese history book, learning from their strategies and observing their old outdated lessons. But again, what happened next became legendary. Rather than accepting humiliation, Queen Nzinga created her own seat and negotiated as an equal. And it's interesting to me that in this moment, not only did she create her own seat, but she used something, or better yet, someone who was living as her seat. So there was life, the symbolism behind the life in the attendant that became her seat, whereas the chair as a symbol was lifeless. But I digress. Whether every detail happened exactly as later accounts describe, the story survived because it captured her character perfectly. She understood power. She understood perception. She understood respect. Remember, she grew up the daughter of a king. So she's been around this her whole life. So she learned things early in life that many people struggled to adapt or understand over years of their lives, and some never even began, or not, some never even realized that. But the resulting treaty temporarily reduced conflict, and it also demonstrated her diplomatic brilliance. But peace wouldn't last. Portugal continued pursuing land and enslaved labor. Queen Nzinga realized that diplomacy alone would not protect her people. Now, this is where many leaders would have compromised, but Queen Nzinga, she chose resistance. When political circumstances changed, she fought. She reorganized forces. She formed alliances. She developed military strategies. A woman, a queen who developed military strategies. And we see modern day societies and modern cultures that disrespect women so blatantly and so vehemently, as if the only thing that women were made to do were to remain barefoot and pregnant and be housewives and house moms and maids. And it's nothing could be further from the truth. We need look no further than Queen Nzinga or women like her, that lead to the examples of the powerful women that we have the privilege of calling our mothers and grandmothers, aunts, sisters, cousins. I mean, it's a beautiful thing. Now, keep in mind, Queen Nzinga, not only did she develop the military strategies, she also moved her operations when necessary. She moved her operations, plural, when necessary. Now, she adapted. We see that. There is no better example of adaptation than not being presented a chair out of outright disrespect, blatant disrespect, and disregard. The ultimate adaptability in the ultimate side of intelligence or emotional intelligence is to use one of your own attendants who had no clue what was about to occur, to use one of them as a seat. Now, that's one of the reasons that she survived so long. That's because she refused to fight the same way every time. She understood flexibility. Many historians compare her strategic adaptability to some of history's greatest military minds. For decades, she challenged Portuguese expansion. Think about that. We're not talking about weeks. We're not talking about months. We're talking about decades. Entire generations grew up knowing her as the leader standing against colonial domination. This was not merely about territory, it was about survival. Every battle carried consequences for families, communities, and future generations, and Queen Nzinga understood what was at stake. Now, I want to pause here and I'm going to ask a question. How often are we taught stories like this? How often are we taught stories like this? Many students can name European kings. They can name Roman emperors. Many know explorers and conquerors. But how many people learn about Queen Nzinga or people like Queen Nzinga? How many of us can say that? And then the deeper question becomes, why is there such a blatant erasure of figures like this from the history books? Now, let us continue. History is not only about what happened. History is also about whose story gets told. The Black of the Berry exists. Now, there are several leadership lessons that we can learn from Queen Nzinga. One being, never accept someone else's definition of your worth. Never accept someone else's definition of your worth. My brother, my sister, whether you're Black, whether you're white, and you're watching this, I don't care what your nationality is. I don't care what your sexual orientation is. I don't care about your political affiliation. I don't care about your religious association. I don't care about any of that. I need you to hear me and hear me well when I say never accept anybody else's definition of your worth. You are not defined. I am not defined by other people's perception of me. I am defined about what I say, what I think, what I feel about myself. What does God say about me? God determines and defines my worth. And I choose to be the person that I know that God has called me to be. Why? Because, again, if I allow you or anybody else to define my worth, I'll always spend my life trying to figure out who I really am. Now, the chair wasn't just about furniture. That chair incident, it was not just about furniture. It was about dignity. And Queen Nzinga understood that. Queen Nzinga understood that how you see yourself influences how others treat you. Now imagine, what I allow will continue. And in that moment, had Queen Nzinga not had the fortitude and the perception to understand that if I don't define my own worth in this moment, not only am I being disrespected in this moment, but the disrespect would have continued. The governor learned in that moment, and I'm quite sure to his surprise and his dismay, and shockingly, that this is not somebody I really want to underestimate, or not anybody I want to take lightly. He learned in that moment that whatever it was that he sought to or desired to accomplish, it was not going to come easy. And there are many of us today, we descended from ancestors like Queen Nzinga and Mansa Musa. We come from a long line of royalty, and perhaps this is going back to the questions that I just asked in terms of whose stories are being told and are able to be heard, and why certain stories never make it to the light of death and never make it to the light of day, rather. And you rely on individuals like myself and other influencers that have the courage to tell our stories in a way that everybody can learn from. Because there is no American history. There is no world history without Black history at all. Now, Queen Nzinga understood that how you see yourself, again, how others treat you. The second lesson is that adaptability is power. The ability to adapt, to adjust on the go, to be flexible, that was the ultimate power move. Right when the enemy thinks they have you where they want you, and from deep within your soul, you're able to adapt, and you're able to make a chess move that checkmates the opponent. It stuns them, and low key, it creates this an impression, a positive impression in terms of I'm impressed. My opponent may never say it, but I know I'm impressed. But I can't let you know that, because again, this is a power grab. This is a power play. Queen Nzinga understood that. So the second lesson, again, adaptability is power. When circumstances changed, she changed strategies. Strong leaders are not rigid. They're resilient. They're open-minded. They think on their feet. You have to. And she understood that, and understood that well. And the governor realized in that moment that he was not dealing with an ordinary person, that contrary to what he had heard or what he had been told, this is somebody that he was going to actually have to strategize and contend with over years. Again, it was decades, right? Decades. The third lesson that we can learn from Queen Nzinga is that knowledge is a weapon. Knowledge is a weapon. Before she became a military icon, she was a student of politics and diplomacy. Her mind was one of her greatest weapons. And there's a lot to be said for that lesson, that knowledge is power, or knowledge is a weapon. I've heard it said many times, surprisingly, in a negative manner, that if you want to keep something from a Black person, to put it in a book. And knowing and understanding our descendants, or our ancestors rather, the people from which we ascended, there were architects, and scholars, and astronomers, and engineers, and kings and queens and military leaders, and the book knowledge, that not just the book knowledge, but even going beyond and beneath the book knowledge, that emotional intelligence just based on wisdom. But again, there were we were learned, we were studied, we were educated people, always have been and always will be. So I'm taking back, doing my part in taking back or dispelling that lie that Black people don't read. I, for one, I love reading. Now, the final lesson that we can learn from Queen Nzinga is that leadership requires courage. Leadership requires courage. She had to walk into that room, and I'm quite sure she wasn't expecting to be disrespected, and maybe she was, because again, she was very astute, very emotionally intelligent. So I'm quite sure that she understood through previous interactions with the governor that I'm sure she had an understanding or an idea of what would have occurred. And in that moment, the courage to show up anyway, and the courage to be exactly who she is and who she was, we can learn a lot from that today. Always show up as yourself. You don't need anybody's permission to be who you are. But let me keep this on Black history. Let me keep this about Queen Nzinga. Leadership requires courage. There are moments when neutrality becomes impossible, and Queen Nzinga repeatedly chose courage despite the overwhelming odds. And today, Queen Nzinga remains a national hero in Angola. Her story continues to inspire women leaders, freedom movements, historians, educators, people fighting for dignity and equality. She reminds us that resistance is not always about winning every battle. Sometimes it's about refusing to surrender your humanity. She reminds us that resistance is not always about winning every battle. Sometimes it's about simply refusing to surrender your humility, or humanity rather. Centuries later, we still remember her name. I'm talking about her now. The Portuguese Empire expanded. Empires rose and fell. Governments changed. But Queen Nzinga's story endured. That is the power of legacy. So as we close out today's episode, I want you to think about this. When history tried to place Queen Nzinga beneath others, she elevated herself. She didn't wait for permission from anyone. She elevated herself. When powerful forces tried to silence her people, she spoke louder. When empires demanded submission, she chose resistance. And because she did, her story survives more than 400 years later. 400 years later. And I'm grateful for that. Thank you for joining me on another episode of The Black of the Berry. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear this story. And remember, Black history is not a footnote. Black history is world history. I am your host, Marvin Lee. And until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, keep celebrating the stories that shaped our world. Again, the blacker the berry, the deeper the truth. See you next week.